Now they will know why they are afraid of the dark. Now they will learn why they fear the night.
Alright, at the risk of being completely exiled from the horror community, I'm going to go out on a very lonely limb here and say that 2002's Halloween Resurrection isn't as bad as fans make it out to be.
You out of your mind?
Don't get me wrong, it's bad. I mean, really bad.
You got that right.
So bad it effectively killed the series for 5 years before Rob Zombie's remake in 2007. Another movie that gets a lot of unfair hate, but that's a video for a whole nother day. I'm going to answer the question, is Halloween Resurrection really as bad as people make it out to be? Does it really deserve to be the proverbial punching bag of Halloween fans? Or, on closer examination, are there actually some elements that not only redeem it, but make it a better Halloween movie than other entries? By no means is Resurrection a great Halloween film. I mean, it's deeply flawed, it's a subpar entry in the franchise. Resurrection is an easy target for criticism and ridicule. It's the 8th entry in a series that by all means has run out of steam and ideas by the close of the 80s. Kept alive only by the sheer greed of squeezing as much money out of the Bob Clark, John Carpenter idea, as the studio and producer Mustafa Akkad could. None of the producers or creators took the franchise seriously by this time. It was simply a dead horse that they took turns beating film after film. They weren't trying to inject any sense of real originality into the stories. They weren't trying to convey some type of poignant message to filmgoers or reinvent the genre, most likely due to Akkad's insistence on maintaining the status quo and not rocking the fan boat like they did in Halloween 3. Interestingly enough, the idea of another Michael-less Halloween was floated around for Part 8 until Akkad put the kibosh on it, presumably still carrying the wounds of H3's failure before it eventually became not only embraced but highly revered by fans. But when comparing Halloween 8 to other last-in-the-line of continuity slasher films and even other films in the series, it's clear that Resurrection's nowhere near as bad as people make it out to be. Let's start with the title. Given Hollywood's track record for sequels bearing the subtitle Resurrection, I'm looking at you, Alien and Matrix. It's no surprise it's considered the bad razor blade-filled apple of the franchise. But what if instead of Resurrection, the film carried the original subtitle of Halloween Homecoming? Would it be as reviled? I mean, the title makes more sense. Michael does return back to Haddonfield and his childhood home. But Akkad's insistence on using the subtitle Resurrection to ensure audiences knew for certain Michael wasn't dead and it wasn't trying to pull another Halloween 3 helped cement its inclusion as one of the worst of the series. Hell, even the aesthetically pleasing but impossible to pronounce Hall 8 Ween title would have been better received than the generically bland Resurrection. It's clear that the movie is really just a victim of circumstance. Consider this. H2O made a ton of money at the box office, so a sequel was inevitable. They already had plans for a follow-up even while filming H2O. Jamie Lee was contractually obligated to return, but wanted to be killed off in the first 10 minutes. So with Jamie gone and no OG characters like Dr. Loomis left to anchor it, the filmmakers were forced to come up with something that would appease fans and keep Michael Myers alive at the multiplex. Now, all things considered, they did the best with what they had. Without more relatives left to kill, they decided to lean into the draw of the Myers house as Michael's motivation for killing. While this motivation is more in line with Jason Voorhees in regard to having a slasher villain defending his home turf against teens and 20-somethings intruding upon it, it's the best possible motivation they could have come up with, aside from having Michael go after Laurie's son from H2O. But considering how annoying and awful Josh Hartnett and his character were,
he's dead. Michael Myers is dead.
It's probably best that they left the whole stalking another relative angle alone. Coincidentally, almost 20 years later, Halloween Kills revisits this idea of the Myers house being a motivation and catalyst for Michael's kills, for better or worse. And while most fans will point to Laurie's unceremonious death as the nail in the coffin for not only the franchise but the film itself, you have to keep in mind Jamie's insistence on ending her tenure as the character, only to return nearly another 20 years later in not one but 3 more Halloween sequels. Though during press interviews for Resurrection, Jamie had nothing but nice things to say.
I'm happy to be able to work with this crew and these actors. It's fun and exciting. You know, it's a very modern, very, I think, good installment of the Halloween series.
It appears she's soured on the film since then.
How do you feel about going back after Halloween Resurrection?
Well, Halloween Resurrection was a joke. Halloween Resurrection I had to be in because the only way that I could have done Halloween H2O was to agree to come back in a next movie.
I'm sure Akkad and the fans would have loved another Laurie-centered story, but you can hardly blame them for wanting to move forward without their flagship star, or Jamie for wanting to exit the franchise. Interestingly enough, Scream scribe Kevin Williamson was the one who came up with the ridiculous Michael swaps clothes with the EMT idea during production of H2O, meaning the creators of Resurrection weren't even responsible for that polarizing plot point. Nice job, Williamson.
No. I just said no.
Not only that, but the studio reportedly polled Halloween fans who were overwhelmingly demanding a sequel.
The producers asked the fans to vote on what direction the next film would take via a poll on their official website.
The same ones who tore it apart upon its release. And this is why we can't have nice things. Comparing it to other rock-bottom entries in slasher franchises which effectively killed the series, prompting a return to roots with reboots, remakes, and reimaginings, Halloween Resurrection isn't even the worst of the bunch. Let's compare it to Jason X, the last in the Friday the 13th original series before they decided to reboot it. I mean, at least they didn't send Michael Myers into space with the ridiculous robot outfit, killing scientists aboard a spaceship in exceedingly absurd ways. Granted, Jason X was at least somewhat able to pull off the killer in space concept, seeing how gimmicky the series had become. After all, Part 7 was basically just Carrie versus Jason, and Part 8 was Jason Takes Manhattan, both movies upping the gimmick ante in each subsequent film. Given Michael's position as one of the original slasher killers in a series that took itself more seriously than Friday the 13th, sending Michael into space would have been tantamount to sacrilege. Now, let's compare it to that other rock-bottom slasher movie, Freddy's Dead, which left the ever-increasingly campy series dead in the water until Wes Craven successfully revived it with New Nightmare, flipping not only the series but the genre itself on its head. One thing you have to give Resurrection credit for is at least it didn't fall into the trap of campiness.
Want a beer?
Or do you want to smoke some pot?
Or we can have premarital sex.
Turning its slasher villain into a caricature of its original iteration, though it certainly comes close.
I ain't paying you to be Michael Myers. I'm playing Michael Myers. If them kids come around and see us dressed up in the same shit, you're gonna ruin the whole effect.
For the most part, Resurrection stays true to the spirit of Michael and his motivations, while Jason X and Freddy's Dead hammed it up to the point of self-parody.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little soul, too.
Backing the series against the wall where it had nowhere left to go but reinvent itself. Now, I know Jason X and Freddy's Dead has its defenders, but there's no denying how far these films strayed from the original elements which made the first film so successful and enduring. And considering how much flack Resurrection receives, it's curious more fans don't view it in the context of these other entries and give it props for at least trying to stay true to its source material. Let's go even further and look at a couple other final sequels before the franchise was rebooted. In comparison, it's clear that Resurrection is streets ahead of all the others in terms of quality. Look at Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, a film so far removed from the original in terms of tone and its portrayal of Leatherface that even its writer considers the film a parody of the franchise.
Scary and sharply self-satirical, Leatherface has a lot in common with the gender-bending killer in The Silence of the Lambs.
And last but not least, the Child's Play series was relegated to direct-to-streaming sequels, ending in Cult of Chucky before finally getting the reboot treatment in 2019. Even when keeping in mind the faults of Resurrection, they still pale in comparison to this long list of ever-diminishing sequels of other slashers in terms of quality, tone, and originality. During the course of this essay, I'm going to draw a lot of comparisons between Resurrection and H2O, since it's widely considered by fans to be one of the last good sequels in the series up to that point, and since it's a clear story continuation. Now, I know a lot of fans love H2O, and rightly so. They finally brought back Laurie, they retconned the events of the previous films by making it a sequel to the original two movies only, and produced a film that ended up successful at the box office. But when comparing the two, there's very clear instances where Resurrection is actually, dare I say, better than H2O.
Are you crazy?
Hold on, hear me out. Let's start with the mask, arguably one of the most important elements of the character and the series. In H2O, there's no less than 4 different types of masks used throughout the film, with the look and the style of the mask changing from scene to scene, a glaringly obvious continuity error and a script supervisor's worst nightmare. The worst of the bunch being a CGI mask that looks more at home in a Halloween video game. Compare that to Resurrection, which uses one mask consistently throughout the film and arguably an improvement over all the masks in H2O and some of the masks in the other entries in the franchise. Remember Myers' blonde mask popping up randomly in Halloween 4?
What the hell is this?
Considering how significant the mask is to the character and the series, you have to applaud Resurrection for correcting the mistakes of the previous film and bringing back a mask that not only looks decent, but doesn't randomly shapeshift from scene to scene.
Good point.
Taking into account how revered H2O is to Halloween fans, it's frustrating when the same ones point to Resurrection as the worst entry in the series while overlooking all the inherent flaws of the most celebrated ones, like H2O. Comparing the characters of the two films, specifically the 20-something students in H2O and the TV contestants in Resurrection, the characters in Resurrection feel so much more fleshed out and are actually populated with decent actors and familiar faces of the time, such as Sean Patrick Thomas, Katie Sackhoff, and Thomas Ian Nicholas of American Pie fame. Whereas H2O boasts the very forgettable characters of Charlie and Sarah, who are really only there to add to the lackluster body count. Granted, H2O has an appearance by Joseph Gordon-Levitt at the beginning, the enduringly charming Adam Arkin as Laurie's love interest, and the return of Nurse Marion from the original. Their character development is either so short-lived or sidelined by the central characters of Laurie and her son that they barely have anything to do or contribute to the story. At least we're given some motivation for the characters in Resurrection, even if they are mostly just shallow or there to pad the body count, whereas the characters in H2O are mostly just a foil for the main protagonist. When it comes to criticism of Resurrection, one of the main culprits fans like to point out is the inclusion of Busta Rhymes and his climactically corny battle with Michael, where he utters the much maligned line,
"Trick or treat, motherfucker."
Busta Rhymes should not be karate chopping Michael. I have a real problem with that.
Now, there's no denying that this fight scene and the aforementioned line bring the film down to a level unbecoming of a Halloween sequel. But, again, when comparing it to H2O and its casting of LL Cool J, Busta Rhymes stands out as not only more fun, charming, and a good source of comic relief, but as an ardent fan of hip-hop, he's also a much better rapper.
Busta Rhyme now, MOP now, what you want now?
I know the musical prowess of the budding actors shouldn't have any bearing on which one did a better job, but Busta is just so much more believable than Cool J. I mean, come on. The guy's name is Ladies Love Cool J, and he's playing an insecure, hopeless romantic writing cheesy love stories. It would have been more believable if he was banging one of the hottest teachers at the academy or even teaching a physical education class given his trademark physique. At least Busta fits the role of a sleazy TV producer and plays more of a central part in the events of the story, whereas Cool J's role really only serves two purposes, and that's allowing Harnet's character to sneak out of the academy to buy booze, and allowing Myers to sneak into the school. He doesn't even contribute to the extremely low body count. Now, the real reason why Cool J and later Busta were included in the series had much less to do with their acting abilities or lyrical prowess, as it had to do with simple market research, as it was a ploy to appeal to black moviegoers, which statistics showed supported slasher horror films at the box office to a high degree.
My son is Busta Rhymes. Oh, yeah.
Any filmmaking decision based on market research instead of what's best for the story is an automatic red flag that not only results in distracting from what should be the central concern in any filmmaking decision, the story itself. Now, while Busta Rhymes isn't nearly as good as other rappers turned actors like Ice Cube or Tupac, at least his performance in the film is memorable and his character is more believable. Now, one last point I want to make when comparing the two films is how Resurrection feels in some ways more like a Halloween movie than H2O. Visually, it's pretty bland and feels more like a one-off horror film from the early 2000s than a bona fide Halloween film. I mean, God, just look at that incredibly cheesy jump scare scene at the end in the morgue. But consider this. H2O takes place largely in California. Resurrection returns not only to Haddonfield, but Michael's childhood home. Speaking of Michael's home, the design and layout are much more consistent with the original Myers house, especially compared to the sprawling mansion that was used in Part 5, another mistake from a previous entry that Resurrection rectified, going into great detail to recreate the look.
It's based on the original house in Halloween 8, but we've extrapolated from 1978 to age it 20, 30 years now.
The director of H2O, Steve Miner, is the director of two of the best Friday the 13th films, Part 2 and 3, whereas Resurrection is filmed by Rick Rosenthal, director of probably the best Halloween sequel, Halloween 2. Visually and tonally, I feel like Miner's aesthetic is more in line with the Friday the 13th films than Halloween personally. The decision to bring Rosenthal back certainly added an air of authenticity to the film, plus this guy sure knows how to make any hallway look creepy. Though it clearly pales in comparison to his work on the original sequel, you have to give him and the other filmmakers credit for adopting early modern technology such as texting and live streaming into the narrative to usher it into the 21st century, even if a lot of it looks dated by today's standards. Although Miner is clearly the more celebrated and successful director with classics such as House and Warlock under his belt, having a director like Rosenthal at the helm who has experience with the series itself helped keep the movie more grounded to the original. There's no shortage of crappy slasher sequels out there, particularly when the number starts ballooning into the double digits. But the amount of hate and scorn Resurrection has and continues to receive is undeserved given the vast array of rock-bottom last entries and other even worse sequels. Part of the reason Resurrection is such an easy target is largely due to the level of quality fans have come to expect from the most prestigious and respected slasher series out there. We all know Friday the 13th was really just a reactionary cash grab to the success of Halloween, so we never really expected much from each subsequent sequel. And while A Nightmare on Elm Street outshines the others in terms of originality and contextualization, nearly each sequel was a clear retreading of the formula which worked in the original until Freddy no longer served as the antagonist we're rooting against, but the wisecracking jokester that we've grown to root for. Halloween, on the other hand, maintained a level of quality and connection to the original source material that other slasher sequels were never able to reach. Which is why when we see Laurie finally confronting and falling victim to Michael, it feels hollow. Her victories in the last film quickly dismissed in the opening minutes to make way for a new modern twist on the increasingly tired fable, complete with market-supported casting decisions and a producer who feared alienating fans with anything beyond its tired and true formula. Had they decided to roll the dice on an original idea, made different casting decisions, or used a different title, or just didn't kill off Laurie in the opening, maybe things would have turned out different. But, all in all, I think it's fair to say that Halloween Resurrection ain't that bad. Maybe you disagree. Let me know in the comments below, like, subscribe, all that other jazz. I'll see you guys next time here on Cinephobia.
Damn, you good. Shit you come up with off the top of your head, boy. Why don't you just pat yourself on the back? Oh, watch me. Oh.